Good morning and welcome back to Spit YouTube. Today I'm going to go over a few sporadic, largely disconnected thoughts I have about Slay the Spire. Many of them are just intuitions that I had in the past that are clear to me now as being completely bass-ackwards, and some are simply some perspective things and conversations I've had about the game that I thought were kind of interesting. Thought number 1. Slay the Spire isn't a deck building game, it's a game about questions. When I began playing Slay the Spire, a very obvious, intuitive premise was the clearest day to me. Slay the Spire gets harder as the game goes on. Each floor is generally more difficult than the previous. I made a pretty simple conclusion following this. It went along the lines of, I need to be in a constant state of increasing the power of my run, the value of card rewards and shops and every notice to accelerate the win con that I've selected for my deck. I don't want to fall behind. The game is always in a state of acceleration, and so must I be. And I think this logic is a pretty easy early trap to conclude for Slay the Spire. An analogy for this perspective is like two racers, racing side by side. The racers don't see each other, they just have the knowledge that they're trying to race faster than the other racer. With reference to Slay the Spire, the game is one of these racers, and I am the other, tasked with accelerating my own raw power by finding synergies or cards that bring me that raw power, so that I can race faster than the other racer. This was the logic that I, when I started playing Slay the Spire, concluded. And I think it has some merit. It's better than not realizing that the enemies might be slightly more difficult later on in the run, but I think it's a really short-sighted way of viewing things and just overall wrong. The acceleration game is not actually the question of Slay the Spire. It isn't to take cards that improve the raw power of your run, it's to win. A winning deck will have more efficiency than a losing deck, but it only needs a certain knowable amount of efficiency. There is literally no need for more than necessary. You don't need to be able to deal 1000 damage with one heavy blade to kill Donu of Donu and Deca fame. You only need to deal 200 to 300 or so, let alone the fact that you can always hit with more than one attack. Strength scaling is a viable method, but it may be more game winning to add a Shrug It Off than a Panacea, even if the Panacea lets you keep your flex buff for a future turn. That 8 extra strength might not matter more than the 8 block to keep you alive for a critical turn. You don't need to add a third catalyst to your silent deck that already kills with one catalyst, and a bit of blocking for a turn and waiting a bit. Having blocking cards will also flatten your curve and deny you a chance of brickier draws. 2 Shrug It Offs is better than 2 limit breaks and dying on the spot. Slay the Spire isn't about racing quicker because the game races too. It's about answering the specific question the game asks you, preferably as safely as possible. The big question is always winning. I think this process turns a switch in how to view a run if you've always seen the card game as focusing on your deck and your raw power, or at least it did so for me. Cards aren't added or not added by asking yourself, does this nebulously make me kill quicker, or do I do more damage, or do I do my deck synergistic win con more with this card? Is adding this actually answering the question with a higher chance of winning for me? A somewhat recent example from a game is taking Intimidate on my Ironclad to remove the artifact from Donu and Deca so that my vulnerable can be inflicted earlier. Intimidate doesn't really improve my deck that much. I normally use that 1 mana in most fights to draw to or to play my high damage options. I play Reaper to heal to full every fight anyway. I've answered the question of hallway fights extremely reliably. It's the question of Donu and Deca that I need to be aware of, and the best way to answer that question involves a quick and easy removal of artifact. It may seem obvious when put like this, but if the option was between an Inflame and an Intimidate, the specific math might dictate that as long as you can reliably remove artifact a turn or two earlier, you'll heal more from Reaper, deal your 50% more damage breakpoint earlier, etc. It might flatten the curve. And again, it's all about this health breakpoint. Dealing 150 damage twice or dealing 160 damage twice isn't as much of a difference compared to having Intimidate or not to greatly be able to remove the artifact so that it actually hits for 150 as opposed to 100, especially if fighting an enemy gamer that has less than 300 health. This logic can apply in small examples like this, or in larger, more general examples, such as where to path or do you need more elites? Or is a specific elite a question you can't answer reliably, but the final boss is a question you can answer reliably? You can get really into the minutiae of this too, obviously. At some point, every action you take is a play of percentages that affects every future action, and your aim is always to take the highest percentage option. If you quantify, for example, yourself having a 90% chance of killing the final boss and only a 30% chance of killing the Reptomancer, then maybe you ought to avoid elites entirely. But if you have a 95% chance of killing the Reptomancer and that gives you a 50% chance of giving a relic or a potion or something that'll make you have a 95% chance against the final boss, then maybe it's worth it. You can get really down in the weeds with these percentage questions at some point. For what it's worth, this is a pretty common concept in a lot of games, and maybe I'm the only one who fell into the initial trap. In card games, it's often about playing for the most EV positive line, even if it's less cool or flashy. In a MOBA, it might be more analogous to not taking extra damage items, but building a tank item so that you can survive longer. If in this example, you might need to extend a fight's duration to be able to deal more damage output in whatever way. MOBAs can get complicated. I think all gameplay can be improved. If you you take a step back and simply ask, how does one win a game of this, and work backwards from the goal, as opposed to starting from your deck and the very start of the run and trying to move forward. All of this obviously assumes that your goal in Slay the Spire is to win, by the way, and not to, like, I don't know, see the Poggers number go up high. If your goal in a Slay the Spire run is to see the Poggers number go up high, then, like, pop off king. More power to you, I don't blame you at all. But I think when I play strategy games, my sole focus is typically on being as strategic as possible, and often the idea that has the most strategy required is the strategy that tries to win, or thinking about logic that tries to get you to win. Thought number 2, this one Reddit post that I saw. This is going to be a relatively minor thought and is largely related to thought number 1. There was this Reddit post I saw a couple days before writing this script, and I've linked it in the description. OP gets a pretty amazing Pandora's box from Nia and a grand finale early on in Act 1, and builds a setup really early on for consistent, high damage, phantasmal killer plus grand finale kills with a swath of defense as well. My point here is that OP has already reliably answered the question of the run, seemingly. Maybe some minor removals from the merchant here and there, and some minor optimizations in the deck can technically be made, but they've already answered the main question of the run. Congratulations to OP. The top comment on this post asks why OP didn't do elites on Act 1 and 2. The second top comment asks why OP skipped 2 boss relics. Many people responded to this post with a really critical outlook. The main argument seemingly went something like this. You ought to fight elites to get stronger. Skipping all elites therefore means you are weaker than you could have otherwise been. I think these sentences can be true, and it is almost certainly true for the OP of this post. I'm sure the run could have technically gotten a little bit stronger if they got, say, Anchor, as opposed to not having Anchor, or whatever. But I think it's extremely reasonable and downright correct to say something like, my lose condition is doing anything that could potentially make my answering of the question even slightly more awkward. OP skips a runic pyramid, for example, which is normally pretty good at these discard grand finale decks for the silent. But OP's method of doing grand finale stuff verifiably didn't need it, and I think I could be totally convinced that it wouldn't have improved things inherently. Same with like energy relics that come with a slight downside. I'm sure in this specific example, you can justify it to me some specific misplays in this specific OP's actual play. If you play the seed, follow OP's path, and see what options are available, I'm sure you can improve it. But that's not really my point. Lethal was found. Slay the Spire asks a question and OP answered it. The argument for how best to secure this lethal might involve increasing raw power via relics and the such like, but it could also be not taking unnecessary risks. Perhaps the run has a higher risk into Book of Stabbing due to early wounds, but not to the Collector. A higher risk into the Nemesis due to Intangible, but not to Donu and Decker. I don't know the specifics, but I don't think it is unreasonable to construct scenarios like this. The generalized and typically correct advice of bite off what you can chew to improve your run, for example, killing elites to increase raw power, is fine, but the question isn't about raw power, it's about answering the question of the run. Final point here on Thought 2, I find it really funny how one replier says, if all you say you need is to remove cards, elites give more money, which helps you buy removes. I mean, I guess since Pandora's box removed a lot of the cards you'd be looking to remove anyway, maybe it doesn't matter as much, but relics can also get you closer to infinites. All of these sentences could be true, but are also like entirely irrelevant in my mind. In my mind, if OP has enough money to buy all the removes they feel is necessary to secure the win sufficiently, and has absolutely zero need for relics, then why incur any risk? Thought number 3, run Viewpoints. I both started and stopped playing Slay the Spire well before the Heart was released. I started around December 2017 and stopped my initial obsession sometime around July 2018. For context, the Heart released in November 2018. When I typically think of a successful Slay the Spire run, my thoughts always end at the Act 3 boss. The aforementioned question that requires an answer for me has always been Donu and Decker, the Time Lord, or the Woke Bloke. I've always viewed the Heart as a piece of bonus content that's just sort of there. It takes up a smidgen of the UI in the top left-hand corner, but that's kind of it. You beat it 4 times for the related achievements, see the cool comics, and end it at that. Alright, story time. About a year ago, I had an idea for a YouTube video. I hadn't played much of the Watcher yet at all, and I hadn't even locked all of her cards, I think, and I wanted to catalogue my journey of learning her from Ascension 2 or whatever she was at to Ascension 20. I knew that I wanted to include ahead of time as part of this video, this joke where I go, I've completed Ascension 20 on all of the characters except the Watcher. But as it pans to the defects Ascension counter, it only says Ascension 18, as at the time I'd only completed up to Ascension 17 as the defect. It was then going to cut away to a quick fire montage some 10 to 20 20 seconds long of me completing the last 3 ascensions. I thought this would be a pretty funny, minor gag in an otherwise very analytical video about my learning of what I think works on the Watcher, evaluating cards, showing my learning process, having a bit of fun, etc. That idea has kind of morphed into this video in the end, but I digress. As part of this process, I was recording my Ascension 18 runs as the defect when I ended up having one of the craziest runs of Slay the Spire that I ever had. I'd used a card that I'd never considered as a justifiable card in any deck. I had some insane luck, fought some very difficult and particularly strategic battles, and had some incredibly funny moments. From this, I got extremely distracted from my 0 to 20 Watcher Discovery thing and tried to make a video highlighting this honestly very interesting run. I got quite a bit of the way through the video and I was quite proud of some of the jokes, some of the editing, some of the content in it, and it's still in my back pocket as a project that I want to work on and finish at some point, despite being like nearly 9 months old at this point. Anyway, as part of this process, I was showing a rough draft of this video to a friend of mine, and he said something that I hadn't even considered in my hundreds of hours in Slay the Spire. He said something like, you're not even trying for the heart in this? You're just going to the 3rd floor boss? With a tone of not necessarily judgment, but very much indicating a lack of sharing the same excitement I had towards the achievement that I did actually get. And it's a thought process that I hadn't even considered for Slay the Spire. Seeing the heart as an intended regular part of the run was very alien to me, and it turned out that the other friend who I was showing the draft to also viewed the heart this way, just knew already that I didn't view it that way and thus didn't bother to mention it. I find this view of the heart very interesting. There's not that many games I've played where a successful run has got an in-game completion reward. In Slay the Spire, this is unlocking the next ascension, with an optional boss fight afterward that requires you to both hamstring your run a little bit, such as fighting a harder elite, giving up a relic, and giving up a rest and smith, and asks a harder question than the normal win-con boss. The closest comparison point I have is, if you played Isaac during Rebirth or Afterbirth, after you've unlocked everything in that game, most people that I know that continue to play runs just had their runs be a chest run. In the chest, which is the final floor of the game, there's an optional boss called Mega Satan that is typically a bit of a pushover when considering the general strength of a run that gets to that point, and is only accessible if you went for angel deals throughout your run, which is an optional side thing. You technically have to fight the angels within those angel deals to acquire the keys that let you unlock the door to Mega Satan, but typically people who do angel deals will do those fights anyway, as getting those keys gives you a higher chance of getting angel deals anyway. It's like if in Slay the Spire, when you got the Ruby key, it gave you like a 5% higher chance to get rare cards. You could totally see a world where you go for the Ruby key earlier just to have a higher chance of getting rare cards, and it just also happens to unlock a bonus boss. Anyway, the point of comparison is to say that in the Binding of Isaac, I don't think anyone really viewed Mega Satan, again, around Rebirth and Afterbirth, as the intended boss to show that a run was a success. Blue Baby was typically the end of the run, and if it just happened to be Mega Satan, that's fine and all, but it didn't really make that much of a difference. I have no critique of anyone who views the heart as the proof of a successfully played good run, or if anyone who views the proof of a successfully played good run as ending at Act 3. Generally, I don't think anyone should be critiquing anyone for how they enjoy video games, especially single-player ones where your actions can't negatively affect others. But I find these two main views of heart-proof and Act 3 proof to just be really interesting. I'm curious if you guys have any opinions on how you have gone about playing Slay the Spire, if you see every run that you take as having the aim of being heart-focused or just Act 3 focused. Is it related to when you started playing or something else entirely? As an aside, I recently got Slay the Spire on my phone now, and I've been trying to do the ascension climbing with the requirement of beating the heart specifically, trialing out this perspective that some of my friends have. It's going interestingly, and it's actually going to lead into the next thought for the video. Thought number 4, the heart in Slay the Spire. Back when I had barely played against the heart, I'd viewed the final question of each run as the following. Every single final boss fight exists on a continuum. On one end, I can out-sustain them and eventually kill them. Think a defect Frost plus Focus build or an Ironclad Barricade build. On the other end of the continuum, I can burst them in 1 to 3 turns before they can deal my maximum health in damage. Think an Ironclad Strength Scaling build or a Silent Catalyst build. Some runs might exist somewhere in the center, where there's a mix of both being defensive and offensive, like you are in most hallway fights, but this is the general locus of viewing the final boss fight. Then, each of the 3 bosses had their own twist. Donu and Decker are 2 enemies, each dealing 36 to 48 damage a turn when it's their turn to attack, with about 250 health each. Notably, they start with some artifact. The Woke Bloke has 2 bonus cultists, is slightly more punishing to power builds, and has a second form that means you can spend the first phase scaling more appropriately. The Time Lord deals about 21 damage, but increases that damage by 6 for every 12 cards you play, forcing you to analyze your deck more strictly on how many cards it takes to set up, be it a defensive or an offensive setup. Anyway, This is a fun mini-game of analysis, but a lot of these points are basically the same. Stands for a very, very, very specific type of infinite deck that the Time Lord just happens to demolish. All of the bosses deal 30 to 4 damage a turn, have about 500 odd health, most builds can beat them the same way, and thus the question is really easy to access and understand, and it can be planned for from your very first decision. This same process of analysing the practicalities of the question of the heart, back when I fought the heart, led me to this general viewpoint. One was that the heart punishes high damage builds because it has a damage cap, and does 60 damage to you 2 turns in a row, which is typically enough for lethal. This lethal can even be in 1 turn if you take enough damage from the effect that says 1 damage for every card you play. A lot of the successful lethals that could kill Act 3 bosses, such as just playing Flex and Limit Break and Heavy Blade and Whirlwind for 3 turns in a row, doesn't work against the heart, as 750 health is a much higher breakpoint and he maxes out at 300 damage a turn and he'll probably die 2 turns without playing any block cards, but block cards equals less damage, blah blah blah. None of that is groundbreaking, right? It's not groundbreaking to say that the heart is slightly harder than an Act 3 boss, but I'd converted all of those thoughts into a pretty high bar that the heart asks you to try to accomplish. Adding all of the extra things like the 5 curses it shuffles in, the artifact it can get, the fact that it can make the 1 damage per card played into 2 damage per card played, made it a very difficult idea, at least in my head. Now that I've been playing on my phone and doing the heart every run, I've realized a very, very simple fact, which is just like the Act 3 bosses, there exists a continuum where each of the poles can easily say, on one end, simply kill the heart in 4 turns, you can only get hit for 60 damage and 36 damage, so if you just play like 700 worth of damage over 4 turns and maybe 40 odd defense, you'll be perfectly fine. Like what I've just said is lethal. For 700 damage over 4 turns and a bit of defense is just lethal. On the other end, if you're able to block 60 attack on turns 2 and 3, slightly more than 60 on turns 6 and 7, and have a win con that kills by around 10 or 17, such as Blizzard or Body Slam or Noxious Fumes, you'll do fine. Or again, you can just do a mix of blocking and attacking, but at a slightly higher caliber. For some reason, I just didn't assume that this logic worked for the heart. The heart didn't get consumed into this like normal process that I had used to analyze the Act 3 bosses. I will say I'm only Ascension 4 or so on my phone right now. I only play maybe 2 games a week or so, and I'm sure that the heart gets harder as Ascensions go higher, but maybe the heart is not this crazy, impossible to comprehend a possible consistent strategy for beating like I used to believe. The methodological system I use for evaluation sort of follows like that bell curve meme where at the leftmost end it says simply deal the requisite amount of damage or shield the requisite amount to win. The center guy crying being like, no, beat of death means I should make sure I'm not using a multi-card setup to win. I need to math out my math perfectly and all my turns ahead of time to figure out the damage. And then the final guy again is just saying simply deal the requisite amount of damage or shield the requisite amount to win. The tooling didn't read here is that the heart has given me a lot to think about, both from how ought a game to be designed when it comes to a run-altering optional alternative boss, especially in a roguelike, and what is the question of a Slay the Spire run. Both of those senses, the heart has given me something to think about. Thought number 5, luck be a landlord. When I used to play Slay the Spire, in my head there was this sort of pseudo-platonic ideal of the deck that I would be trying to work towards in a given run. Take for example an Ironclad strength scaling deck. The ideal of this deck would involve Limit Break, Flex, some method of getting Artifact perhaps, Heavy Blade and Pummel for single target, Whirlwind and Thunderclap for AoE and Vulnerable, Offering and Shrug It Off to kill quicker, that sort of thing. When I say ideal, I don't mean some sort of perfect 2-card deck of 2 times drop kick and a bag of marbles. I mean the generally super comfortably game-winning form of a given deck idea. I have enough experience in Slay the Spire to reasonably conclude that a certain congregation of Limit Breaks, Flexes, Inflames, Mana Generation Relics, Whirlwinds, Offerings, and so forth is a winning run. In an ideal strength-scaling winning deck though, a card like Evolve is a bit of a brick. The single best strength-scaling deck wouldn't run Evolve because drawing Evolve is not drawing Limit Break or Flex or whatever. As such, a card like Evolve would have been an instant skip for me. This style of play is successful to an extent. If your goal is to climb Ascensions, this will work. I got to Ascension 20 with the Ironclad and the Silent with this method. Once you find guaranteed lethal, even if it's this very simple way of viewing Slay the Spire, you don't need to look for alternate lethals. But I find this style of play misses both a beautiful thing about Slay the Spire as well as a semi-pragmatic thing about Slay the Spire. I'm going to compare Slay the Spire to another game, Luck Be A Landlord. Just like Slay the Spire, Luck Be A Landlord is also a roguelike deck builder where you slay a monster in a tall building. But there's some notable differences in how the logic for each run manifests. Slay the Spire has a natural hand size of 5. The starter deck features 10 to 12 cards. Adding cards to the deck that are better than the starter cards improves the relative value of a given hand by a certain amount. Same for removing some of the starter or worse cards in the deck. And there are no blank draws in Slay the Spire. Comparatively, Be A Landlord's hand size is 20. The starter deck features 5 cards, although later ascensions add up to like 3 Ascender's Banes that delete themselves after you've drawn them enough. Adding literally any card will improve each draw, as new cards until around card 25 or so cannot be worse, save for the exception of a couple of relics. That being said, in Slay the Spire, your starter deck is successful at completing starter fights, and is helpful enough during earlier bosses and elites, although after a while playing a striker or defend will feel awful, as the power value of that card has declined greatly in comparison to the rest of the cards in your deck. Be A Landlord is no different. Eventually, you are forced to add cards to your deck, lest you be unable to pay your rent. Both games only let you add 1 of 3 cards after a certain time. For Slay the Spire, it's after every battle. For Be A Landlord, it's after every roll of the gambling machine. In Be A Landlord, you will lose 99.9% of your runs if you attempt to go for a perfect platonic ideal to the exclusion of adding other cards to your deck. For example, take a flower deck. Flowers synergize with bees, rain, and sun. If you only take flowers, bees, rains, suns, and like self-deleting temporary gold-giving cards, you will typically lose by your first rent payment, if not by the second. The chance of you building this deck completely off the rip is extremely unlikely. Instead, Be A Landlord necessarily beckons you to pick cards pretty much every opportunity you can for the first 5 to 10 selections minimum. Inevitably, by doing so, you're going to have a hodgepodge of a couple of pretty minor, not yet game-winning synergies. An equivalent for Slay the Spire might be if your starter Ironclad deck happened to have, in addition to it, an Evolve and a Wild Strike, a Flex and a Pummel, and a True Grit and a Sentinel. None of these cards obviously interlock into some crazy synergy of their own. There's no idealized status deck or strength scaling deck or exhaust deck that will feature all 6 of those cards, but in a Be A Landlord context, it is literally necessary to add whatever you can for the first few rent payments. As you progress, you'll inevitably find relics that boost some of these minor synergies up. Relics too in Be A Landlord are from a massive wide pool where you can only choose 1 of 3. The way your deck will inevitably line up in Be A Landlord will be that it'll feature something like 1 to 3 major synergy points, where you always take improvements to those whenever you see it, but will often also feature 2 to 3 minor synergies that just happen to be sufficient and be more beneficial than not. A big part of why this is necessary is not just the early game of Be A Landlord, but some late game practicalities. Like in Slay the Spire, the final floor is an inevitability. You will see it in a guaranteed amount of turns. In Slay the Spire, the final floor is floor 60, which means you only have 60 floors before you must win. In Be A Landlord is payment number 12. You only have a limited amount of time to add cards. The chance of you hitting your idealized deck within that limited time frame is extremely low. More often, you'll only see a small amount of those synergy cards that actually get towards that idealized deck. However, and this is an extremely simple idea, if you have multiple different synergies running simultaneously, you'll be able to add more things that improve your run. An Evolve on its own in a strength scaling deck might be kind of mid, but an Evolve with some burning packs, some power throughs, and some fire breathings, while you'll still scale your strength slightly slower than if you didn't have those cards, gives you an extremely powerful draw, defense, and AoE engine in your deck. This is slightly different from taking a Pummel Strike because it makes you better against early elites and improves your deck compared to the starter deck. It's about the macro strategy for card acquisitions and making decisions when you have options to pick new cards. If the idealized deck with only 1 major synergy point can only be happy seeing a small amount of the pool of cards, say 8% of possible card drafts, having multiple coexisting synergies allows you to be happy drafting from a higher proportion of your options, say 20% of possible card drafts. There's another relevant bit for this. Both in Be A Landlord and Slay the Spire, a lot of the relics have specific benefits. Some relics might only be good if you're trying to go for a certain idea. For example, the Calipers relic is only good if you're going to have too much shield at some point. Bag of Marbles is only really good if you plan to hit on your first turn somewhat meaningfully. Kunai is only good if hitting 3 times on a turn won't kill you. If your build cannot use these relics, that can be fine, but if at the onset of a given run you can assume you will acquire X amount of relics, surely permitting yourself to gain as much value from them is quite desirable. It's the same logic as card drafting. Why only let yourself benefit from 40% of the possible relic pool instead of 60% of the relic pool? It'll likely improve your run if you're able to have more powerful synergies consistently showing up. It's one of the 2 main ways you can gain power in a Slay the Spire run. A consistently winning strategy should be able to leverage both all of the card options and all of the relic options. This may seem like a very obvious idea, but it took Luck Be A Landlord to ask me very explicitly to have multiple minor synergies in order to be able to win. Luck Be A Landlord is a very interesting game to compare to Slay the Spire. The question of Slay the Spire is often a bit more nuanced, having to deal with things like opponent attacks and like hand structuring and these sorts of things, which is a large part of Slay the Spire. And the questions that you ask yourself typically revolve around how do I want to structure my hands. Luck Be A Landlord's question is always just, do you make enough money? And at some point you get a really intuitive feel for, as long as every card makes me on average 2 gold by this point of the game or 5 gold by this point of the game, whether it be a board of flat all 5s or a high rolly board with 1 plus 150 and a bunch of plus 2s, you've given yourself lethal. Slay the Spire is a little bit less direct in what a lethal looks like, but the skills are still pretty transferable. I know that when I start playing games, I will often justify extremely tangential synergies out of a childlike hope that I can do something incredible by tenuously connecting 2 completely unrelated cards. My best example is in Legends of Runeterra, where I kept trying to build this Twisted Fate Call the Pack deck, Call the Pack being the card that if you have 4 Poros at the top of your deck, you draw the 4 Poros, because Call the Pack can really cutely level Twisted Fate. As I go on, it's clear that things are only strong if the core synergies interlock in the most spiderweb interconnected ways that actually gives genuine strength and value. I think I often end my evaluation at that thought, but I think Slay the Spire actually manages to accomplish something beautiful, where you can search for interlocking synergy, but outside tangential connections can also be justified as well, as long as you play it right. I think you can look for 2 largely disconnected, only slightly mutually valuable spiderwebs, and for that to be a stronger, more game-answering strategy. Summary. This video is largely focused on 2 general themes. The first are some strategic traps that I found myself falling into the past, and some remedies and new thoughts I have regarding them that I'm only aware of now. The second are some perceptions on how the viewpoints of others differ from mine in relation to Slay the Spire, why I think that is, and how we ought to be thinking about viewing this game of Slay the Spire. This video wasn't about specific strategies to improve gameplay or anything, like whether X card is good for Y archetype or not. It wasn't about whether the game is fun, or if I like it, or what my favorite relics and builds are, although I will quickly answer those now. Yes, it's fun. Yes, I like it. I'm addicted to Prismatic Shard, and I will never ever deny myself from making a flex build. But some more abstract thoughts I had about the game. To end this, I want to say some thoughts I have about these thoughts. Some meta thoughts. Just like how I believed that I had logicked my way through Slay the Spire strategic systems many years ago sufficiently, and I now believe that I could have viewed them very differently, future me will have some added nuance or perhaps even completely different strategical viewpoints to current me. Just like in Legends of Runeterra, your growth as a player often involves re-evaluating the logical systems that you had previously used and seeing just how different those systems are compared to your systems now. The advice and logic that you use to learn and master your starting decks in LOR or climb your first ascensions in Slay the Spire may be and likely are very different to the logic that you used for your later LOR decks or archetypes or the later Slay the Spire ascensions. I view pretty much everything in life as an analogy to other things. Like Be A Landlord was used earlier in this video as an analogy to explain to me a Slay the Spire idea, and in the future I will find new analogies to apply to Slay the Spire, and it'll be a grand old time. I look forward to that day. A lot of the thoughts I have aren't groundbreaking. I'm sure 99% of the people watching this are from LOR, and they probably knew logic like this from LOR. But the previous time I played Slay the Spire rigorously was well before LOR's launch, so to me it was interesting to see how I had learnt. If you enjoyed this style of video, let me know. This type of video idea I've had where I just say some thoughts I've got on some games that I like has been bouncing around in my head for a while now, and I've got a bunch of other games that I want to do a very similar thing to. Both strategy games as well as some non-strategy games. If you have any perspectives on either the thoughts themselves or on the structure of the video, do please let me know. Likes and subscribes or whatever, they're just numbers going up. They're fun, but they mean less to me than a comment. So if you have literally anything to say, I'd love to read it. Over the next couple of weeks, I plan to do 2 separate series, and then maybe I'll do some bonus stuff, but there's 2 series that I'm currently working on right now. One of them is this Some Thoughts on series, such as this video and ones that I'll be making very soon, that I've already written parts of the script for. Another is something that only 3 people will enjoy, but I'm going to enjoy making it, so I'm doing that anyway. I just want it to be clear on what Spizz's YouTube looks like in the near future. Alright, see you later, alligators.